Welcome to Beyond the Needle, the aesthetics business podcast. Each week, I'm here to share real, actionable strategies and bring on expert guests to help you level up, attract more patients, and build a standout brand. Let's turn your passion into a thriving business together. Real quick before we get started. Now, I know this from experience, both as a business owner and as a former clinic manager. The operations side never gets easier as a clinic grows. Staff schedules, payments, marketing, all of it pulling attention away from the treatment room. That is, unless you have Gloss Genius, the intelligent system that does all of that work for you, so you can focus on the work you love and watch your revenue grow. Gloss Genius is sponsoring this episode and is giving you an exclusive code. Enter code NEEDLE at glossgenius.com for 50% off your first 2 months of their med spa and aesthetic plans. Available to US businesses only. Okay, let's get into the episode. Hello and welcome back to Beyond the Needle, the aesthetics business podcast. Today I'm talking about something that I think is probably one of the most underinvested areas in aesthetics, and that's patient experience. The entire experience of being your patient from the moment someone finds you online to the way they feel 3 weeks, 4 weeks after they've left your clinic. Now, when I look at the clinics that are genuinely thriving, you know, the ones with long wait lists, consistent friend and family referrals, and patients who have been coming back for years, it's almost never the result that they're getting in clinic that's doing that. Most good practitioners produce good results, but what separates the truly outstanding clinics isn't just what happens in the treatment room, it's everything else around it. So that's what I'm exploring here today, the whole patient experience and how you can really elevate that to help grow your clinic. Now, before we dive into the good stuff, just a quick reminder, if you do enjoy these episodes, please don't forget to subscribe on your platform of choice and do leave me a little review. I really do appreciate it. Okay, let's get into it. So when I was working in a clinic in my early career, this is something I've never forgotten. The clinic owner took the whole team on a spa day at a 5-star hotel. And it wasn't just a team building exercise or award. She wanted us to experience a great patient experience. She wanted us to experience 5-star luxury so that we could take those little snippets of what made the day so great and talk about how we could implement them within the clinic. So after we had that spa day, we sat down and we talked about, you know, what it smelled like when we walked in, what the lighting was like. When we sat down, what was offered to us before we even asked, was there music? And if so, what was it? The tone in how people spoke to us, the way we were greeted when we walked in. And the reason that she did that is because you cannot create an experience that you've never had yourself. If you don't know what it feels like to walk into a space that's been, you know, thought about, where everything has been considered before you even thought to notice it, you can't reverse engineer that in your own clinic. You just keep doing what you've always done and what you know, and you can never grow beyond that. So that conversation really changed how I look at service and how I looked at the importance of the whole patient experience and how even some of the little things can really, really change the way you feel and the loyalty that you have to a place that you go to. You know, I went somewhere the other day and I was greeted. Well, I wasn't greeted by the receptionist when I walked in. She was sat behind a desk and she was eating her lunch and she barely looked at me when I walked in. You know, I'd been there before, so I kind of knew what to do. I just went and sat down. But that is a really poor, you know, way to greet people, especially, you know, where I was spending a lot of money. And that kind of thing really impacts how you feel about a place and how, you know, likely you are to be loyal to them in the long run, because you don't want your patients to just feel like another patient. You want them to feel like you want them to be there and that you enjoy them being there and that you really, really appreciate their custom and that you know them on a personal level. All of those little things will really help set you apart from the competition. So before we dive into the specifics, I want you to think about the best experience you've personally ever had as a customer somewhere, whether that's a hotel, a restaurant, a spa, somewhere that made you think this place just really gets it, like you were the only person there. And then I want you to keep that place in your mind, because almost everything I'm going to say in this episode will come back to it. So the one thing that I think people need to realize is that the experience starts way before they come in for their initial appointment. most practitioners think of the patient experience as the appointment itself. And yes, of course, the appointment matters enormously, and we'll get into that. But the experience starts the first time someone finds your Instagram or lands on your website. The first time someone discovers you and realizes that you exist. So by the time that person arrives in your clinic, they have already formed an impression of you. The booking process is probably the first real test. And it's one where a lot of clinics fail without realizing it. So think about what happens when someone decides they want to book. They've already done some research. Maybe they've been on your Instagram, they've read some of your content, they've watched some of your videos, and something has made them trust you enough to take the next step. And then they try to book. And it takes, 3 or 4 clicks just to find your booking link. Or the system that they land on feels quite clunky on their phone. Maybe they can't find your prices anywhere and they have to send a DM just to find out, or they can't see your list of services properly, so they don't know whether you offer the thing that they think that they need. And something in that experience slightly erodes the trust that you've just built. The best booking systems I've seen feel like an extension of the rest of the brand. They're clean, mobile friendly, fast. The information someone needs to make a decision is visible without them having to kind of dig around for it. And the booking process itself takes just a couple of minutes. You are also much more likely to convert people quicker, and without them having to necessarily reach out to you first, send you an email or give you a call or whatever to ask questions. If you make sure that your website answers all of the possible questions that people could have there and then, so having like an FAQ page on your website, or having a video, and I've spoken about this in previous episodes, a video on your booking page if your booking system allows, or on your inquiry page, something like that helps people understand the process. So, a video, and it only needs to be kind of 60 seconds of you talking, greeting people, thanking them for coming to your website and for thinking about making a booking, and letting them know what will happen once they've made that booking. So once that you've made that booking, you'll receive a confirmation email and will have all of the details that you need to know before your appointment. Then you'll come in and, tell people a little bit about what to expect when they come in for their initial consultation and what that process looks like. Answer any possible questions that they might have within that video. And because they're hearing it directly from you and they're hearing it from a person, it helps form that trust, and they are more likely to go and book, especially if you're charging them for the consultation. When people have to part with money, it creates that extra barrier. And also, they've never met you before. So, to ask someone to give you money when they've never met you before is a lot, right? I mean, I absolutely think that you should be charging for your consultation. But if you put that video in place and you have that FAQs page that will help clear up any possible questions and barriers that will stand in people's way before they want to part with their money, it will just make that process a lot more seamless, and people will be more likely to follow through with it rather than hesitate, possibly come away from the website thinking they'll come back to it later, or send an inquiry, which then creates, more work for you. Then there is the confirmation message. So go and read yours right now if you haven't recently. Most clinic confirmation messages are basically a receipt, appointment confirmed, date and time, please arrive 5 minutes early to fill out forms. That's fine, but it's also completely forgettable. What if your confirmation message actually made someone excited for their appointment? What if it told them exactly what to expect, what to wear, what to avoid, how long to allow, and ended with something that sounded like a real person wrote it rather than just a booking software template? Something like, I'm really looking forward to meeting you, or if you have a team, Dr. So-and-so is really looking forward to meeting you, whoever they booked, put the practitioner name there. They're really looking forward to meeting you and having a proper chat about what you're hoping to achieve. That is the tone. That's what changes the way that message is perceived. It's what turns a transactional confirmation into the beginning of a relationship. And then there's the reminder. Don't just send a generic reminder, your appointment is tomorrow, or your appointment is in 48 hours. Use that message to tell them something useful, what to do beforehand, what to avoid, maybe something that builds a little anticipation, like, we've set aside some proper time for your consultations, so come with any questions that you have. We're really looking forward to meeting you. That reminder is a marketing touch point that most clinics waste. And then one more thing to touch on in this section. So your intake form, another thing that isn't spoken about enough. Most intake forms are a lot of medical history, allergies, consents, all of which of course is necessary. But what if you added 2 or 3 questions that actually told you something useful about the person sitting across from you? Something like, what's brought you here now after however long you've been thinking about it? How would you like to feel in 6 months' time? Or what are you most nervous about? What would feel different for you if we got this right for you? The answers to those questions tell you everything about how to approach the consultation. And they tell the patient, before they've even sat down with you, that this is a place that cares about more than just the treatment side of things. Okay, the moment they walk through the door, don't underestimate the power of this. You know, think about what it's like when you walk into a 5-star hotel. You've got people there offering to take your bags, offering you a drink, trying to make you as comfortable as possible. Think about the last time you walked into somewhere genuinely excellent and you just feel it immediately before anyone says a word to you, before anything has happened, that this was a considered place. And that's created almost entirely by sensory details that most clinic owners never really think about. So, scent is always the one I start with because it's probably the most powerful and one of the most neglected. We are more emotionally responsive to smell than almost anything else. Is the sense most directly linked to memory and feeling? The best hotels in the world have signature scents. They diffuse the same fragrance in every space consistently, so that over time, guests begin to associate that smell with how they feel when they're there. Rested, looked after, somewhere lovely, somewhere luxury. You know, there's a hotel I went to when I was really, really young, like 13, 14. And I can still think about that smell. It had such a distinct smell. And there's only been a couple of occasions since then when I've smelt that somewhere random, and it brings the memories of that hotel back to me, that holiday, and it makes you feel good because you associate it with a really good memory. That's how you want people to feel when they smell your clinic, and then when they're out and about in their daily life and they smell something similar. Your clinic can absolutely achieve this. It doesn't mean, you know, buying an expensive diffuser and filling the room with something overpowering. It just means choosing something really considered and subtle and keeping it consistent, so that when a patient who's been coming to you for 2 years walks in, there's a sensory anchor that says, I'm here, I'm safe, I'm in good hands, I'm about to have a great experience. This kind of thing is so much more powerful than we give it credit for. Lighting is another thing that changes everything. So overhead fluorescent or harsh white lighting really doesn't have a place in a patient-facing space. It makes people feel quite exposed, whereas you want them to feel relaxed and at ease and comfortable. So soft, warm, considered lighting really changes the energy of a space. And your treatment room will obviously be different because it's a clinic, but if you can, try and think about the lighting there too, and definitely in other spaces like the waiting room, the bathrooms, things like that, just adding lighting elements that make it feel warm and soft and inviting. And then there's temperature, which no one really talks about, but if your waiting room is cold, patients are uncomfortable before they've even sat down. Whereas if your treatment room is too warm, they're uncomfortable during the treatment. It costs almost nothing to think about, and it really affects how people feel throughout their appointments. This is definitely worth paying attention to. And then music. So again, most clinics either have nothing or they have some generic Spotify playlist in the background that they've not really thought about. But music really does set a tone, so it communicates something about who you are. It takes 20 minutes to create a playlist that actually fits the atmosphere you want to create, and then play it consistently. You know, you might have different playlists depending on what's booked in, or something more energetic for a quick treatment, something slower and more calming for a longer procedure, or if it's a facial or, you know, something like that, you probably would want, you know, some soft, maybe slightly classical music, you know, something that's going to help people relax rather than something that's too energetic and quick and has lots of lyrics. You know, this level of thought is exactly what 5-star hotels do. And then there's the greeting. Okay, so think about what I said at the beginning of this episode. When I went somewhere the other day, I walked in and it just gave the whole appointment like a bit of a strange feeling, you know, because I'd walked in, I'd looked at the receptionist, smiled, she hadn't really even acknowledged me, she was eating, she was looking down at her phone, and I just kind of made my way over and sat down. And that isn't a great, you know, first impression of the place that I was going to, and it didn't fill me with much trust for the appointment that I was about to have. And I think, you know, if someone's coming to a clinic and they're spending a lot of money, that would probably piss them off a little bit and would probably make them not want to spend as much money as they would have done. And it would definitely be harder, you know, to build loyalty with that person. The moment someone walks through the door is where the tone of the entire appointment gets set. If you're with another patient when someone arrives, make sure there's a system that means they're not standing in a reception wondering what to do. So a clear welcome message on a screen, or a member of staff who greets them warmly within seconds, or even a presented note that says, welcome, we're expecting you, make yourself at home, we'll be with you shortly. You know, whatever works for your setup, everyone is going to be different here. But the greeting itself, being called by your name immediately, being welcomed like you've been expected and looked forward to, that's something some clinics still aren't doing consistently, and it's one of the simplest things to change. And then also let's think about drinks. So offering a drink to someone proactively, you know, whether it's tea or water with something in it, you know, water and lemon, or a warm drink, or something like slightly more refreshing in summer, maybe like an elderflower. That kind of thing takes 30 seconds and it makes a real difference because it's an act of hospitality. and it helps someone feel comfortable and looked after and welcomed. So greet people properly, use their name, make sure your reception area is comfortable, make sure people know what to do when they walk in. You know, if you don't have a receptionist, or if your waiting room is small, you know, make sure people know what to do when they arrive. Think about your lighting, think about the temperature, think about the music that you're playing and the tone that that's setting. Think about the scent, have a signature scent. Think about how you want the scent of the clinic to make people feel, and offer them a drink. So simple, but it makes such a difference. Okay, and then there's the consultation. So in my last episode, we talked a lot about consultation process with Dr. Cameron Amjad. So if you haven't listened to that episode, do go and listen to it. He talked a lot about the consultation from, you know, the perspective of a clinician and how to really optimize that process and make it more likely for people to convert. But I want to touch on it again here and add a few more thoughts to it. So the consultation is the single most important thing you can do in terms of trust building. It's where a patient decides whether you've actually listened to them, whether you understand what they want, whether they trust your judgment enough to let you treat their face. And the difference between a consultation that achieves all of those things and one that doesn't usually has nothing to do with your kind of clinical knowledge. It has to do with how you listen. The most common consultation mistake I see is practitioners who are already thinking about the treatment plan while the patient is still talking. They've heard the first sentence and they've clocked what's needed. You know, maybe you've done a quick assessment of their face, and now you're already ahead of the conversation. And the patient can feel it and it will make them feel rushed. They need to be seen as a person, not just a patient sitting in front of you. So the consultations that build the most trust are the ones where the practitioner asks more questions than is probably necessary, but it makes the person feel listened to and like they've been given the space to talk freely and really be understood. So this could be, you know, you following up on something that the patient said in passing, where you reflect back what you've heard in a way that makes the patient think, yeah, that's exactly it. They've really understood what I was trying to say. What made you decide now is the right time is one of my favourite consultation questions because it tells you so much about where the patient is emotionally. Someone who says, well, I've got a big event coming up and I really want to feel my best and I've been lacking confidence lately, needs a different conversation than someone who says, I've been thinking about this for 3 years. I'm so terrified of something going wrong, but I finally feel ready to have the conversation and to think about the next steps. Both are coming in essentially wanting the same thing, but they need to be met quite differently. What are you most nervous about is another one. It gets out into the open the thing that they've been sitting on since they've booked or since they've started thinking about having a treatment, which means you can address it directly rather than just kind of dancing around it. And the fact that you asked shows them immediately that you're the kind of practitioner who thinks about how they're feeling, not just what they need in terms of treatment. And then at the end of the consultation, rather than just presenting a treatment plan or listing out a load of treatments that you think would be suitable, really talk through your thinking. Don't be afraid that you're boring people or giving them too much information or overwhelming them. Talk it through in a way that you would explain it to a friend who trusts you. The reason I'm recommending this is because what I'm seeing is X, and what I think will make the biggest difference to that is Y. And I want you to understand the reasoning before you decide if it's right for you. That approach is very rare, and patients remember it because it makes them feel like an intelligent adult who's been given real information rather than just a recommendation to follow blindly. It makes them feel empowered. It makes them really understand, you know, what's going on, what changes are happening within the face, what changes are contributing to the concerns that they're coming in presenting with, and why you've recommended certain things for. Something no one tells you is the better your business does, the more time it takes to run it. More appointments and more locations end up meaning more hours spent on scheduling, charts, follow-ups, and marketing, instead of time with your clients and staff, let alone your family and friends. There's a better way, where you keep growing and get more time back. Gloss Genius is the intelligent system that handles more of the work for you. Scheduling, payments, charting, marketing, staff management, and client follow-up, all automatically working in the background to fill your calendar, grow your revenue, and keep clients coming back. Over 5,000 aesthetic practices already trust it to run their operations so they can focus on their vision. Ready to earn more and actually get your time back? Use code NEEDLE at glossgenius.com for 50% off your first 2 months of their med spa and aesthetic plans. Available to businesses in the US only. Okay, now back to the show. And then one more thing on the consultation. So have a mirror position so the patient can see what you're seeing when you assess her face, and then talk through what you're looking at. Show them exactly where and why, because most patients have been staring at their concern in the mirror, when they look in the mirror, in isolation for years. And when you show them the bigger picture and explain, what's going on structurally and the relationship between different areas of the face, it completely changes how they think about treatment, and it builds enormous trust in your judgment. Okay, now let's talk about the treatment itself and the details that a lot of practitioners rush past or don't think about at all. So the treatment room is where most practitioners feel most confident because it's the most natural part of what they do. But there are still things worth thinking about that go well beyond, the clinical aspect of it. So before you begin, make sure you tell your patients exactly what is going to happen. Walk them through it. So I'm going to start on the right side. You'll feel a small scratch and some pressure. Some areas will feel a little more tender than others, but that's completely normal. And I'll check in with you as we go. That very quick, 20, 30-second preparation eliminates a lot of anxiety patients feel going into a procedure, because anxiety is almost always worse when there's an absence of information, when they don't know what to expect. And then narrate as you go in a really warm and reassuring way. So that was the first one. You're doing really well. We're about halfway through. This area tends to be a little bit more sensitive. Just let me know if you want me to pause. People who feel informed feel safe. And when you give people the space to communicate with you when they're not feeling comfortable, or when they need to pause, or, when things get a little bit too much, they're not going to be sat there thinking in their head that they need to pretend that they're fine when they're not. And just having that reassurance that they can let you know if they need to stop will almost always eliminate their anxiety enough that things are going to be fine and they're not going to be sat there worrying. Check in on physical comfort throughout. So temperature, position, whether the bed is comfortable, ask how they're feeling. These check-ins signal that you're paying attention to them as a person, not just to the treatment itself. I also think if you're offering facial treatments, having a warm blanket available in winter makes a real difference, or an extra pillow to go under the knees to take the pressure off the lower back for longer treatments. These are very small things that cost almost nothing, and patients really notice and comment on. And then there's the end of the treatment. This is where so many people rush, and it's such a missed opportunity. The patient has just had something done to their face. They're probably slightly tender, slightly disorientated, and desperately curious what they look like. They need a proper moment to kind of decompress, not just to be bundled off the bed and pointed at a mirror. So sit with them, show them the results properly, walk through what you did and why it looks the way it does. Tell them what to expect over the next few days, not just some, generic one-liner about how bruising might occur and that's completely normal. Tell them if they're going to notice some swelling, what's normal and what to expect by day 3 or 4 or 5, and when they'll see the full results. People generally want you to be specific, and it makes a real difference between a patient who goes home confident and one that goes home worried, and worried even more every time they look in the mirror and see something has changed. And then, of course, make sure they receive an aftercare email that explains all of those things that you've already said in clinic, and also reassures them that they can reach out to you anytime should they have any concerns or questions. Again, just like the reminders that we talked about earlier on in this episode, try and make this sound warm and actually written for them rather than just a generic message from a system. Okay, then there's the follow-up. So for a lot of injectable treatments, people are probably going to have a follow-up put in the diary for 2 weeks later if it's Botox, maybe 4 weeks later if they've had filler. But I would always recommend getting people's next appointment booked in. So getting something in the diary. Avoid letting people leave your clinic with nothing further booked in as much as you can, because this will make a huge difference to your retention rate. And it's an added layer of security for your clinic because you've got people coming in on rotation. When people's next appointment is booked. You've got that kind of secured in your diary. So always make sure people leave with their next appointment booked. Then after someone has had a treatment, make sure you're sending them a follow-up message, 48 hours after their appointment. Just something that says, I've been thinking about you, hoping everything's looking good at this stage. The swelling should be starting to settle now. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm always here if you need anything. Most booking systems will let you set this up automatically, and you can tailor it depending what the treatment is that they've had. If they haven't booked in the next appointment before they've left, I would follow up with them kind of 8 to 10 weeks afterwards, depending on the treatment, and reach out about rebooking. Again, let's avoid anything generic like a time to rebook message, but something a little bit more specific like your results will be at their best for X amount of months, and I'd love to get you in before you start to notice any change. Does X date or X date suit you? Always give people options. And this is true for inquiries as well. If someone's emailing you, making an inquiry about booking in, when you go back to that person, don't just say when will suit you, give them some options. It makes it much easier for people and much more likely for them to go, yeah, that works for me. Let's get it booked in. Seamless. And it's done in 2 emails rather than 5. Okay, let's talk about the details that people tell their friends about. because there's a real difference between a good experience and a memorable one. A good experience is one where everything went smoothly and the patient leaves satisfied, they're happy with their results, but a memorable experience is one where something happened that they didn't expect and didn't ask for, and that made them feel like they were seen as an individual rather than just a booking. Think about the experiences you've had that you still talk about. I'd almost guarantee that most of them centre on a specific unexpected detail. You know, the hotel that had your favourite biscuits in the room because they clocked it from your last stay, maybe a vase of flowers and a handwritten note welcoming you back. Or a restaurant that remembered your allergies without you having to mention it again. The spa that offered you a specific herbal tea because you mentioned being stressed in your appointment. None of those things are complicated to do. They just require attention from people and a system for recording information and the intention to use it. In clinic, this looks like a notes section in every patient record where you capture personal details. You know, she mentioned her daughter's getting married in September. She's been dealing with a difficult time at work. She's going through a divorce. And then the next time they come in, you talk about it because you genuinely remembered and you're interested and you care about them. That is the thing patients tell their friends about. They feel so good coming to you. They feel so well looked after. They feel so important when they're in your space. It makes them feel amazing. And people don't get that kind of care and attention when they go to a big corporate chain of clinics where it's more of a conveyor belt, one patient in, one patient out approach. When they come to you, an independent practitioner, usually they're paying more, but they do so and they're happy to do so because they're getting a great experience. They feel like they're in safe hands. They feel like they're cared for. They feel important. And that can be like really small things. Like, for example, somebody's favorite skincare product is a specific thing and you've had some sample products in that day. So you say to them when they leave, here's a couple of samples. I know this is your favorite. I've just had this sample delivery. Take a few with you. That kind of thing really makes someone feel seen and cared for and important. When patients come in for the first time, you could let them leave with a beautifully presented little card or a small sample of something relevant to what they've just had done. I've seen clinics that send, small little arnica cream pots and an ice pack and a branded linen bag for anyone who's had injectables for the first time. You can pop a few skincare samples in there. It's just something that goes the extra mile that people remember. People love a freebie. Everyone loves a freebie. You can't go wrong with freebies. And then there's treatment anniversaries. So keep track of when patients first came to you and acknowledge it on the anniversary. Send them an email like, I can't believe it's been a year since your first appointment with me. I'm so grateful you chose to trust me and I love watching your skin evolve. Here's a voucher towards your next treatment, something like that. It lands differently and it's very different to any kind of promotional communication because it's not asking anything of them. It's just giving something back and thanking them genuinely. Birthdays are an obvious one, but so few clinics do them properly. Even if you just send people a happy birthday message. But I do think, again, it's nice to include a little voucher in there, something that they can use towards their next treatment or a free add-on that they can have with their next treatment. And referrals. Make it really easy for your happiest patients to refer people and make it feel really meaningful when they do. So, there's apps that you can use to make this process seamless. But I think the best referral schemes are ones that give something to the existing patient that's referred and the new patient. Something like £50 each to use towards their next treatment and for the new patient to use towards their first treatment if they're spending over a certain amount of money. And I think it's really fun for the patient who's referred because they can see that money on their account and they can see that money grow with every person they refer. So they can literally watch the money stacking up, and what better incentive to refer people than that when you know that if you refer a few more friends that can probably pay for your next Botox appointment. Okay, now let's talk about auditing your patient experience. So the most useful thing you can do with everything I've talked about today is go through your own patient journey as if you're experiencing it for the first time. Book an appointment or ask a friend to book an appointment at your own clinic using your own booking system and notice how it feels. Read the confirmation that comes through and ask yourself whether it's memorable or just serving its purpose. Walk into your clinic as if you've never been there before, ideally at a time you're not there regularly so you can see it fresh. What's the first thing you notice? How does it smell? What does the waiting area feel like? Ask a trusted patient for genuine feedback, not just did you enjoy your appointment, which will always get a yes, but ask what they would change, what made her feel most at ease, whether there was ever a moment that they felt unsure about something. Ask them to give you honest feedback that you can actually use to change things for the better. And as I said at the beginning of this episode, go and experience somewhere genuinely excellent. Book a night at a good hotel. Speak to your accountant about whether you can put it through the business for research purposes. I'm not going to start giving people financial advice here, but go and ask your accountant. Go to a restaurant with a really great reputation for service. Have a treatment at a spa that lots of people talk about. And pay attention to every single detail from the moment you make the appointment or make the booking to the moment you leave. Notice the small things. How do they greet you? What does the space smell like? Do they use your name? What's the tone of their voice like? How the experience ends? What the follow-up looks like if there is one. That attentiveness to what makes something excellent is exactly the skill you're developing, and you can only develop it by experiencing it. You know, it's all well and good if someone walks away and tells their friends and family about you because they've had a great result, but it's even more powerful if they say, you know, I finally found someone who really listened to me. The whole experience was just so much more different to anything else I've experienced anywhere else. You have to go. The result gave her confidence in you, but the experience is what she's talking about. Every single thing I've covered here today is achievable, and none of it requires a big budget or investment. It just requires looking honestly at every part of what it's like to be your patient and asking at each stage, is this as good as it could be? Is this the experience I'd want? So start with one thing this week, maybe rewrite your confirmation message or add a couple of new questions to your intake form that are a bit more personal and that will help you really get to know people on a deeper level. Choose a scent for your waiting area. That's probably the most fun one out of all of these things. Send a follow-up message to every patient for the next month and see what comes back. It's not going to happen all at once, so just focus on one considered detail at a time. I really hope you found this episode helpful. If you did, I would love for you to share it with another practitioner who you think needs to hear it or you think would benefit from it. And if you want more on growth, marketing, and building a clinic that genuinely stands out, make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss the next one. See you next time.